And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I am your host, Black Box Ned. And because today is Tuesday, you guys can say hello to Snoopy here. All right, so how is everybody doing today? True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning is a segment that I do where I discuss multiple subjects within one single episode. And about 2 weeks ago, one of you guys sent a request to discuss the Idaho murders, the Idaho Student Murders, a quadruple homicide from 2022. And I had to be very honest. That was a true crime case that I had heard of in the news. I had seen little snippets, but I was not familiar with the story. I wasn't even aware of the victims' names or the perpetrator's name at the time because I had been following a lot of other stories here on Black Box Online Radio. Every Monday, I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer, Zodiac Monday. Every Wednesday, one about Jack the Ripper, Ripper Wednesday. And on Fridays, talking about D.B. Cooper for Cooper Friday. But the Idaho quadruple homicide saw the deaths of 4 University of Idaho students in Moscow, Idaho: Ethan Chapin, Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Xana Kernodle. And it really took the nation by storm because people were just very, very perplexed as to how and why that this could have happened. And this wasn't something that was similar to a mass shooting where you had someone just walking into a public place and firing a bunch of shots and shooting at random. You had someone who was entering into the victims' homes at around 4:30 in the morning and stabbing 4 people to death. And it didn't appear at first that there was a strong connection between the suspect and the victims. By December 30th of that year, 2022, an individual named Brian Koberger was arrested in Pennsylvania, of all places, and then extradited back to Idaho for the trial. And the trial actually won't start until 2025, if I understand. But we have Jerome here in the chat. Jerome from the French Wrecking Crew says, "Hi, Ned. Hello to you too, Jerome." And Jerome and I have been doing several different episodes on his channel, the French Wrecking Crew. I'm a regular guest over there, where we do a panel discussion show about the Zodiac Killer. And we recently did an episode about Jack the Ripper. So with the Idaho murders, a lot of things are still coming out. This is a story where I have to follow the news, you have to follow the news. We don't know everything yet. So, some examples of things that we can go through is that, firstly, I have to give full credit to the sources. The Law and Crime Network has been all over this case. Also, 48 Hours has multiple episodes out about this. Court TV, News Nation, and believe it or not, I particularly like the coverage from the Daily Mail, and that's a source that I've been very critical of in the past. So, some of their backtracking is Brian Koberger, the suspect in the Idaho quadruple homicide, was a vegan, and it appeared that he was Googling vegan restaurants in the vicinity of Pullman, Washington, where he was a grad student in criminology. And he found one called the Mad Greek that was in Moscow, Idaho. And he drove to visit this restaurant, and he saw 2 people working there. One of them was named Maddie Mogan, and the other one was Xana Kernodle. And he became infatuated with them as soon as I found out this thing about how he had visited the restaurant where they worked. I was immediately thinking, all right, he was zoning in on the 2 victims, and that's why he went over to their house to commit this horrible, horrible set of murders. This is the concept of somebody who was a lady killer, some type of sexually deprived male, as terrible as it sounds, decided to get revenge on society, revenge on women, going after a woman that he was not able to obtain. The concept of, if I cannot have you, no one will. And, it's despicable, but that is a type of thought process that goes into these observations that people are trying to figure out. Like, there are a lot of people who have followed this case: lawyers, FBI agents, and just the true crime panelists on various programs on the networks and episodes that I was talking about. And they're just saying, we don't really know the motive. Well, something that I like to do here on Black Box Online Radio is to talk about the motives, to talk about the possibilities, to talk about what could drive somebody to commit a crime like this. And it really does appear that there was a specific target in mind. And as I said, I have to give credit to the Daily Mail and their up-to-date coverage on this because they were exploring the possibility that perhaps there weren't even two specific targets for Brian Koberger, that he was looking at murdering one person, Maddie Mogan, and that she was the specific target. I can only gather what could have happened. He goes to the restaurant where she works, he learns her name, maybe he's searching through social media profiles, finds her on Instagram, begins following her page, and develops a particular type of obsession with her because he was attracted to her physical appearance, or maybe it was the things that she was saying to him during the conversation. Then he goes to commit that specific murder, and there are other people in the house. There were 6 people in the house, 4 of them ended up dead, and there were 2 survivors. So the other 3 victims, sadly, might have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that is, just another extremely saddening thing. And you can see so many interviews that the victims' family members have done where they are just publicly grieving and they're talking about starting foundations for their lost children. And I just think that that is some good that can come out of this. But, just the sickening acts that people do. I don't know about you guys, but I don't get used to this. I'm talking to you guys about true crime almost every single day here on Black Box Online Radio, but I don't get used to those things. And we have some people here in the chat. We have Lacey who says, "Good morning, Ned and everyone." Good morning to you too, Lacey. And Lacey and Jerome are having a good conversation here. And Lacey says, "I truly believe Brian did it." Lacey, I don't think there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. One of the videos on News Nation was talking about how the defense might try and build some type of theory that these crimes were committed by knife. They were stabbings. And to say that the knife in question might not have been the right knife to use for the stabbings, because one thing that Brian Koberger did, one thing that perhaps completely solidified his guilt was he left a knife sheath behind at the crime scene. And I heard 2 different variants of this story. In the first source that I heard, which I believe was an episode of the Law and Crime Network talking about the Idaho murders, they said that the knife sheath was found next to the body of the victim, Madison Mogan. But in another one, I think on 48 Hours, they said that the knife sheath was found underneath her body. So that would mean that he was not holding the knife sheath and he's committing the murders and her body is on top of it. So it would be out of sight for him at the time. That would provide a reason for him to leave. That would provide a reason for him to leave without picking it up. But there was touch DNA from the knife sheath that matched Brian Koberger. And I'm sure anyone who's followed the case has heard the story about how they were able to track him down because his family lived in Pennsylvania. He drove with his father from Washington State to Pennsylvania to spend the holiday season. They were stopped twice by police officers, or after the murders, he's confronted twice by police officers. But the more famous one is a body cam video of the police officers talking to Brian Koberger and his father. They followed the car back to the house, and they learned the location. They obtained garbage from the house that had his father's DNA on it, and they were able to make this type of DNA connection to Brian Koberger. I mean, you have his DNA at the scene. You have his suspicious whereabouts. He turned his cell phone off or put it on airplane mode for the duration of the murders, and then after the murders stopped, it's back on. He was driving around claiming that he was stargazing, driving south from Moscow, Idaho, for some reason, going to a supermarket completely out of the way of his home, then driving back to Pullman, Washington, then drives back to Moscow, Idaho. Now, remember what I said. It's possible that the murders occurred around 4:30 a.m., 4:30 in the morning, thereabouts, I'm estimating. And then, apparently, Brian Koberger drove back to Moscow, Idaho around 9:30 a.m. that same day. This is very normal for killers to go back to the scene of the crime. And you might even hear criminologists talk about this. They want to admire their work. It's terrible, but that does appear to be the thought process. A very clear example of this is the story of Robert Chambers, who was known as the Preppy Killer. And he was convicted for the murder of Jennifer Levin back in the 1980s. But this is a case where he was actually reduced to manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for it. But he murdered her in a park, and then he was seen sitting on a wall just gazing at the park, kind of just staring blankly at the park where this took place. And that all just seems to be in line with this is how and why criminals operate. And some more things in the chat here. Lacey says, Zaina and Ethan were collateral damage, in my opinion. Yes, I think so. I think so that Xana and Ethan were collateral damage, and it's possible that Kaylee Gonsalves was also just someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And a lot of people, even Gray Hughes was a guest on Court TV. Gray Hughes from Gray Hughes Investigates, and he was talking about how he also believed that there was a single target, and it was Madison Mogen, and the other three people, four victims, the other three people were just in the way of Brian Koberger trying to commit this murder. Now, I mentioned that there were two other people in the house. This is where the story gets weird. It appears that this is not a mystery, like Lacey saying that she thinks that Brian Koberger is guilty. I think that he's guilty. In the United States of America, people live under the standard of innocent until proven guilty. Oh, yes. But have you also heard of if there is smoke, there's usually fire? And in this case, there is a lot of smoke. So I think that he's going to be found guilty. The only way he would be found not guilty is if some way, somehow, he was able to corroborate this weird alibi that he was driving around stargazing. If some way, somehow, they were able to demonstrate that there was actually someone else's DNA, the knife was stolen, or he just had real solid explanations for everything as opposed to a bunch of wild nonsense that has been peddled. I think that he is going to be found guilty. And we have Cat Daddy Steve here who says, good morning, folks. Good morning to you too, Cat Daddy Steve. You get a cheers from Snoopy. And Scott is here. Hello, Scott. How's it going? Now, as far as the actions of Brian Koberger, we can perhaps deduce that he committed these crimes, even though he has not been found guilty in a court of law. However, there are the other two roommates in the house. One of them saw him. And this is something that is so shocking. Someone saw this person wearing all black clothing. Nothing wrong with that. Always got to wear all black, right? It makes you look good. And then he was wearing a ski mask, but they could still see his bushy eyebrows through the ski mask. And Brian Koberger allegedly walked past one of the other roommates and didn't make an attempt to attack that person. He had already killed 4 people, but did not make an attempt to attack the 5th and 6th residents of the house. One of them went back to her bedroom, and she was in hiding. And she stayed there for at least 9 hours. She didn't make the phone call to 911 until 11:58 a.m. And this is where the story gets weird. Because when you look at the actions of the roommates, so many people are just asking the question, how could you not call 911 if you saw an intruder in your house or you knew that there was some type of commotion going on? If you were so afraid to leave your room for 9 hours, you're not going to call 911? What would drive somebody to do that? And one possibility is that there were drugs in the house. I know I'm going off of a little bit of rumor and speculation and gossip, but that is what some people believe actually happened, that they had drugs in the house and that they're trying to make some type of arrangement with somebody to come over and destroy the drugs before the police get there so nobody gets incriminated. And, I think just at that point, that is an extremely selfish thing to do. And also, I mean, there might even be some legal penalties involved with that about not calling 911 at the time of an emergency. Most people believe that they wouldn't have been able to save the lives of the roommates of Xana, Maddie, Kaylee, and Ethan, but they perhaps would have completely contaminated the crime scene if they brought somebody else over that. And that's how the killer could be exonerated. And Brian Koberger openly said that he's looking forward to being exonerated. Yokoso says, how was he that stupid bringing his phone everywhere? I don't know, Yokoso, because, as I said, Brian Koberger brought his phone to the scene, right? And he turned it off or put it on airplane mode for the time of the murders. After the murders stopped, he turned it back on, and his cell phone is still pinging in different areas. And, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm not trying to act like this is a better way to do it. But I was even just thinking, you can watch a movie on your phone with the YouTube app or something. Maybe you have Netflix on your phone. I had that for years. Just put it on your smartphone tripod. Or if you don't have one of those, just leave it on your bed, playing a movie for the 2-hour duration when he was gone. There's so many things that would have made a lot more sense than turning your cell phone off and bringing it with you in the car. How was he that stupid? All right, this is going to come to the next point, Yokoso. Pat Brown was doing an episode about an unrelated story. I think it was actually her Freeway Phantom episode, when she was talking about Brian Koberger. And she was saying that everybody's saying that this guy is smart, yet he left all these evidence at the crime scene. Yeah, he was a PhD student in criminology, yet he left all of this evidence at the crime scene. And furthermore, it goes so far beyond the cell phone. The fact that he left the knife sheath behind that had his DNA on it, touch DNA, as I said, that's going to solidify his guilt. But there's something I want to share with you guys about that. Because even though I'm not a criminologist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a profiler, I'm not a forensic anything, I'm just some guy who watches true crime stuff, and I've been doing that for 30 years. I'm reminded of the story of the murder of Bobby Kent, which went on to become the subject of the book Bully, A True Story of High School Revenge, and they made it into a movie in 2001 with Brad Renfro. And that showed a very clear depiction of a stabbing where Brad Renfro's character is named Marty, and he is stabbing the bully, Bobby Kent, and he has a knife. He takes off the knife sheath, and he just throws it to the ground. And I was just watching that in the movie and thinking, wow, what a weird thing to do. But they wanted to zone in on that for a particular reason. Then he commits the stabbing, gets in a car with his accomplices. They drive away, and then he's just saying, oh my goodness, I left my knife sheath behind. This is rather typical behavior from inexperienced criminals because their focus is on committing the crime, not holding on to the knife sheath. So even though that is something that is most likely going to give him a guilty verdict, I'm not surprised by that. And when other people are calling him out on that and saying, it's like, well, why would he do that? Why would he leave this knife sheath behind? As I said, there's already one possibility. Maybe it was under Matty Mogan's body and he just didn't see it, out of sight, out of mind. And number two, the focus is on committing the stabbing, not holding on to the knife sheath. Completely normal. And William Kane is here. He says, Ned, thumbs up. Hey, back right over to you too, William Kane. Cheers from Snoopy. And Jerome says, wearing black is not a crime. Absolutely not. Yes, Jerome, I've seen you in your corn t-shirts. They're always looking good. And also, I appreciate that video that you did with the music that you put on Facebook, Jerome. And everybody can follow Jerome's page, The French Wrecking Crew, on Facebook. I also have a Facebook page for Black Box Online Radio, and you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday, talking to you about the Zodiac Killer every Monday here on Black Box Online Radio. You can also use the super chats and super thanks on YouTube. Okay, so as far as these actions of this story of the murder of Bobby Kent, I told you he was a bully. He was bullying his best friend named Marty. So they launched a very elaborate plan to have him murdered. And this is a very odd instance where they hired a hitman. Marty still goes along with it. So you have the hitman and the best friend are committing the murder. But the people who orchestrated the murder were the bully's girlfriend and his best friend Marty's girlfriend. The women were the ones who were the conspirators. The women were the one who were planning the murder. They were the ones who were the driving force. If you were to even do a Google search on the murder of Bobby Kent, you'll see that the two women were the driving force. Yet what happens to the men? They get life in prison. Marty was actually sentenced to death, but then that sentence was reduced to life in prison with parole. Sentence was commuted, you could say. And the other two women are currently free right now. One was sentenced to life, one was sentenced to 40 years in prison, but their sentences were greatly, greatly reduced, and they are both living freely. And William Kane says, are you talking to me? Oh, you're responding to somebody in the chat. I was like, yes, I was talking to you, William Kane. I gave you a cheers with Snoopy, but you're talking to somebody in the chat. It's all good. So back to this Idaho murder angle. Brian Koberger was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, which wasn't too far from the Idaho University campus, University of Idaho campus and off-campus housing. And this has raised the questions of, is criminology a dangerous subject to study? Because is he another person who has been doing quote-unquote research and using it for a malicious purpose? And he is somebody who is looking at this for, maybe he was planning a murder for a very long time. Not the concept of the smart guy who fell off the rails and that snowballed into something destructive. No. This is someone who decided from a very early age that he wanted to be a killer and was waiting for the opportune moment. The third possibility is just that he had no intention of being a killer until he developed this obsession with Maddie Mogan, and he wanted to commit murder about that. And when he wanted to commit her murder, to be very precise. Three possibilities that I think are very likely. Now, firstly, what is criminology? On this channel, I talk a lot about criminal psychology, but psychology to me is the study of human behavior and its relationship to the brain. Criminology would be about human behavior and its relationship to the law. I was watching a lecture earlier today on criminology, and I really wanted to see what people would say, in response to this about what is the need for criminology? Why study this thing? Can it be a tool or a weapon? And the honest answer is criminology is extremely valuable because when people study the relationship between human behavior and the law, they are looking at how the crimes are committed. They are looking at how the criminals are behaving. How are people breaking the laws? What are the statistics about how many people are breaking the laws each year? What are the statistics on how police officers are responding to the criminals who are breaking the laws? How do you make the community safer? How do you keep these types of crimes from happening? All of that stuff comes into the world of criminology. So no, I don't blame criminology, and you cannot blame any of the professors that Brian Kohberger had. I don't even care what they said. I don't even care if there was hypothetically a professor that brainwashed him into committing these murders. I don't think that happens, but hypothetically, if that did, I wouldn't blame the professor because somebody like Brian Kohberger, allegedly, he hasn't been convicted, but somebody like Brian Kohberger had conscious choice before he committed the murders. And I will tell you firsthand from following stories here on Black Box Online Radio, this is how the prosecutors are going to look at this story, saying, this person drove there with the specific intent to kill. Premeditated crime to the nth degree. The victim was most likely pre-chosen. I mean, you have this Brian Christopher Kohberger account that's following the victims on Instagram, and then they are just, like he's interacting, leaving likes or something. The victim was pre-chosen. He went there with the intent to kill, and when he's driving there, he had the ability to turn around at any time and say, nope, I'm not doing it. He had multiple opportunities to stop. This shows complete awareness of his mental faculties and complete control. Cold, methodical, and calculating homicide. Now, Jerome asks a very good question. He says, Ned, can you recommend a good documentary about this case? Yes, Jerome. I would highly recommend the episodes of 48 Hours, and I watched 2 of them on Brian Kohberger and the Idaho Student Murders, and 48 Hours is always a great starting point. Their episodes are very general, and some of the other sources that I was talking about, such as News Nation and the Daily Mail and the Law and Crime Network, they can be very technical. Like News Nation really got into the interviews with some of the family members, as well as talking to an FBI agent, and he's sharing his own personal experiences and comparing that to the investigators in the Brian Kohberger case. But that's stuff that you want to know how to swim before you jump in the deep end, right? That's definitely some deep end stuff. But the 48 Hours ones are definitely the ones that I would recommend starting with. Conman87 says, hi from Spain. Hey, Conman. Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And Conman87 has something for Jerome, and he says that your recent live shows have been awesome. Ah, yes, even yesterday, we did a panel discussion over on the French Wrecking Crew where we had 5 of us to start out, and we had a guest from the Netherlands named Eduard V., who has been following the Zodiac Killer mystery for a very long time. At one point, he even ran a website about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates from 1966, and he had the opportunity to exchange emails with Bob Barnett, the former boyfriend of Sherry Jo Bates, who was more or less the prime suspect. That guy denies all involvement with it, just saying that he didn't do it. His DNA didn't match the crime scene, yet he is still the prime suspect, just to show you that some things won't go away. This is going to be a big difference between the Idaho quadruple homicide, because Brian Kohberger's DNA did match what was found on the knife sheath that was left behind. Some guy like Bob Barnett, his DNA did not match. He wasn't arrested. This isn't rocket science, people. some kind of science, though. And Jerome says, that's because I have an amazing panel. Well, these panel discussions have been very good because it gives us a very, very big opportunity to talk about not only the Zodiac Killer and the pre-canonical crime, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates and so on, but we talked for maybe an hour yesterday about DNA. And before I got into the Zodiac Killer mystery, I didn't know anything about DNA. I didn't know about the differences between nuclear and mitochondrial DNA. But we learn and we grow as time goes by. And even though I'm somebody who watched Forensic Files on repeat growing up, and as an adult too, I mean, I didn't understand how the technicians were doing things. But, because of the Zodiac Killer mystery, we're seeing this at a different level. Because of the Jack the Ripper mystery, we are seeing this at a different level. So, and Conman says, keep up the good work. Hey, Conman, cheers. You got a cheers from Snoopy. But one of the frustrating things is that with the Idaho Student Murders, we can see very clearly that we're not in 1966 anymore. We're not in 1969 anymore. We're not in 1888 like Jack the Ripper anymore. We are living in 2024 where we have all types of surveillance cameras where they can record somebody driving around town, and Ryan Koberger's white Hyundai Elantra is caught on camera in multiple places in Moscow, Idaho, around the time of the murders. Not only DNA left at the crime scene, not only with social media accounts seeing who he's following, not only with reports that he went to the restaurant where Maddie Mogan and Xana Kernodle worked. So much evidence. Whereas with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, imagine if we had videography of even a suspect in the area at the time of the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, just like somebody walking down the street right before she was murdered. Imagine if we had something like that, or perhaps the same type of car caught on multiple surveillance cameras, leaving the crime scene and driving toward a particular direction, let alone with all of the forensic technologies that they have. I mean, nobody was sifting through anybody's garbage in 1966 trying to find a soda can or a pizza crust and extract DNA from it. That's why these cases have gone unsolved for so long. And even beyond serial killers, beyond Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer, D.B. Cooper. How about that? How about Cooper? D.B. Cooper is sitting on a plane, drinking bourbon and soda, smoking cigarettes. He's handling at least one glass, maybe two glasses, smoking 8 cigarettes, leaning back against the headrest. They had his hair on a slide, and they lost it. Lost the cigarettes. No idea what glass he used. He left his tie behind on the plane. Touch DNA galore if they got that fresh. He may have handled the parachute cards that he used when he was opening the parachutes. And I had the opportunity to interview Pat Boland. She thinks that might be one of the sources of DNA that still exists. There's no way that case would be a 53-year-old cold case if it happened in 2024. And Jerome says, a different world, advancements in forensic sciences. And Jeff Thornton is here. He says, hello, Ned. Keep up the good work, buddy. Jeff, thank you so much. And Jeff is one of the webmasters for the Facebook group, The Zodiac Killer and Me. And Jeff works with his wife, Melissa Rose Tappa. And they run a website called ZodiacKillerBomb.com. And their Zodiac suspect is Loringdale Hill, always waiting patiently to hear some more things about their investigation. Now, back to the Idaho Student Murders. Brian Koberger is someone who seemed like he lived a rather troubled life, but it also seems like he was someone who was not immediately abused by his parents. At the very least, there are no reports of that. And even after he's been arrested and publicly named as a suspect and been plastered around all different places in the media, all over America and the globe, his family standing by him. They're like, we love our son. We're standing by him. I don't know if there's some type of abuse going on in the household, but it has been reported that, number one, he was a victim of bullying when he was in school, particularly high school. Number two, he had a lot of problems with his weight, and he was very insecure about that, even though he did lose the weight. Number three, he had a drug addiction in the past, specifically with heroin. It seems like he was dealing with a lot of troubles. But I always have to come back to this, and I don't mean to sound like Sigmund Freud 3.0 or anything, but is it not possible that this is all just a giant mess of sexual frustration? I really noticed that there are these patterns, trends, and similarities that are going on. I was even talking to you guys on True Crime Talk Radio once about Umar Abdul Muttalib, the underwear bomber, and he's writing in his journals about how he's sexually frustrated. And James Holmes, the Aurora, Colorado shooter, how he was extremely sexually repressed, and he just has no luck at all using adult friend finder. I don't know, maybe it was the hair. But as far as Bryan Kohberger goes, one thing I'm not really noticing people talk about a lot are his relationships with women, especially in his 20s. There are also things that just sound so ridiculous to me. And this is one of the reasons why I think people look at the Idaho Student Murders. And that is that somebody like Bryan Kohberger threw his life away. You know, if he indeed do this, that's a little bit better way of phrasing it. He threw his life away. He's somebody who's a PhD student at Washington State University. Why couldn't you just be a criminologist? What is so wrong with that? What's so wrong about getting a doctorate? Get a house in the suburbs. Get a new car. You don't have to always drive the same Elantra. And just live an ordinary, boring, quiet life. Listen to whatever morning show you want, like this one. Watch Netflix in the evening, like a normal person. Why isn't that enough? Yeah, dude. Sorry, you're going to be making 80 grand a year on a rough year. I feel so sorry for you. No, I don't. And that's one of the reasons why this is frustrating. Another aspect of this case is anyone who has followed this must have seen a lot of photos of the people who were involved. And at the beginning, even though I wasn't following this closely, there were the people who were just saying, it's because the victims were either white or white passing and that people are attracted to their physical appearances. I do think that physical attraction may have played a role in this. Being white, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because if they were people, all people of color, then this would also get a certain amount of media coverage. It would just be done at a different angle. The media likes to twist and distort things. But even to the point where they have just this desire to zone in on this particular story. This is something that we were talking about on the live stream that I did with Jerome. Back in 1888 with Jack the Ripper, people did this. People did things like this, sensationalizing true crime cases. Because I was watching the Murder Maps documentary about Jack the Ripper, and they were even saying that, back in 1888, crime stories were very popular and they were sensationalized, and Jack the Ripper was just the biggest one. No. That's not just an 1888 issue. As we see in 2024, the Idaho Student Murders is presented in an extremely dramatic fashion. You have the channels like Court TV, and you have the channels like News Nation, and they intentionally present this stuff in a dramatic fashion. And the worst part is, I fall for it every time because it's extremely engaging. And there's also a very simple narrative that has been established. One defendant, 4 counts of murder, and yes, there's also a burglary charge that is associated with it, but people aren't even going to be focusing on that because this is a very simple narrative that people can comprehend. And Cat Daddy Steve is here. He says, Ned is using logic and Kohberger. That's like touching the black and red wire together when you get a short circuit and sparks. Well, how do you mean that exactly, Cat Daddy Steve? Because, do you mean that other people are not? I mean, it's a very simple story. And I do think that the media has zoned in on this and they've just blown it up. I don't think they've blown it out of proportion. I just think they attracted a very large audience to this particular story. Oh, Ghostwriter is in the chat. Ghostwriter says, Ned, what do you think about Max Tackett being the real Texarkana Phantom killer? Ghostwriter, were you the one who requested an episode about Max Tackett in the past? And yes, the Texarkana Phantom killer, that was a serial killer who operated in Texarkana, Texas, and Arkansas back in 1946, from February to May of that year, in the winter and spring of 1946, never identified. Now, Ghostwriter, if you're the person who requested an episode on Max Tackett in the past, I apologize if I didn't get back to you. What I said was, I used to do a multi-part discussion about the Phantom Killer, and I've done several suspect profile episodes on the prime suspect Yul Swinney, on the secondary prime suspect H.B. Tennyson, also known as Duty Tennyson. I've done one on the unidentified suspect who is simply called the German prisoner of war, but I think that Max Tackett, he was the next suspect on my list. I meant to do that one, and that's when the series just ended abruptly. So, I apologize if I didn't get back to that episode. On one of these episodes of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, we're going to have to do a giant Phantom Killer live stream so we can go through everything step by step. And, I would definitely like to explore Max Tackett more. Now, I do have lots of episodes, though, about the Phantom Killer here on Black Box Online Radio. More time, you guys can check some of these out. You can look at some of the playlists. I also did a multi-part response to the biography of the lead Texas Ranger who was involved with that, Lone Wolf Gonzalez. And the biography is called Lone Wolf Gonzalez, Texas Ranger by Brownson Malsh. I have multiple responses on camera and off camera, like doing like this and doing it in the radio format. And you can get the audio version of these episodes on Spotify under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. And at the end of this episode, I'm going to put a link to the Spotify download. And you can also get it on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. Conman87 says, Ned, you should check out the Alcácer case here in Spain if you haven't already. Insane case when it comes to DNA, lack of evidence, and poor police work. Okay, Ghostwriter. Con Man, I'm going to respond to you in a second. It's just Ghostwriter says, yes, I made the request. Thanks, love you, man. All right, Ghostwriter, on Thursday, I'm going to do a Texarkana episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, coming to you every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will do the Max Tackett episode there because that is long overdue. And, like you're asking about a suspect, and I'm just not prepared to talk about him yet. But I want to do this kind of from the beginning, go through all of the things, and I can do that very, very quickly, talking about the murders of, the first attack of the Phantom Killer isn't even a murder. It's the attack on Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae, who both survived the attack, and the attacks on Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, where they were murdered. And I've also stated that those are the first widely discussed victims that could be possibly connected to the Zodiac Killer. I don't believe it myself, but someone asked me the challenge question once, what is the earliest crime that's, widely discussed that could be attributed to the Zodiac Killer? And I said the murders of Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. Although the earliest crime that I've ever found anyone say attributed to the Zodiac was Jack the Ripper. And I'm going to do a giant presentation on this about all of the possible Zodiac crimes one day. And this is going to have to be done like for Zodiac Monday or something, where we can just go through everything step by step, piece by piece. And I'll just show you the earliest things that they talk about with the Zodiac, the latest crimes they talk about with the Zodiac, for a future Zodiac Monday. But I'm going to get back to Conman87's question. It says, Ned, you should check out the Alcácer case here in Spain if you haven't already. Insane case when it comes to DNA, lack of evidence, and poor police work. Well, Conman87, is there anything else you would like to share? No, I've never heard of this one, the Alcácer case. And I've talked about some stories from Spain here on Black Box Online Radio, such as the Werewolf of IREs. That was a short episode that I did. But when it comes to DNA and poor police work, it is shocking. It is shocking how they don't preserve items. And I'm not talking about in 1888 or 1969. In the new millennium, the crime scenes can be destroyed. There can be evidence that is tampered with. There can be all types of things that are just horrible examples of police work. And You even have stories like in 1971 and 72 with the freeway phantom in the DC area, and the officers just aren't really trying. The detectives aren't really trying to catch this serial killer who's on the loose and trying to murder girls. And Jerome is here. He has something. Ned, it's off topic, but what are your thoughts about the new documentary about the Zodiac Killer coming out in late October on Netflix? The new documentary that's going to be coming out in October is called This is the Zodiac Speaking, which is going to be talking about the Sea Waters yet, and the trailer has been released, although I haven't watched it yet. The Sea Waters are Dave and Connie Seawater, and they have one other sibling, and they claim that they knew Arthur Lee Allen personally. Now, it's my understanding that Dave Seawater passed away. And what are my thoughts on this? Why on earth are you calling your documentary This is the Zodiac Speaking? Has that not been done before? Shameful. You got to get something better than that. Number two, I think that this is just going to be a long line of documentaries that are going to be coming out that might not be going to some very good places for the following reason. The Sea Waters are mostly sharing all of their observations based on storytelling. We're talking all about DNA and crime scenes. Where do they have that? They're just going to be telling stories that they all remember these things about Arthur Lee Allen and Jerome. This could be a very clear example of collective false memories, and I know they wouldn't want to hear that. I know Connie Seawater wouldn't want to hear that, because one point she was even trying to clarify on is that you got this guy, Arthur Lee Allen, and they claim that Arthur Lee Allen drove to Southern California, near Gaviota Beach in 1963, June 4th of that year, to be precise. The Sea Waters were in the car, and then Arthur Lee Allen goes down, commits the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. Then he walks back up to the car, and Dave and Connie Seawater see him with blood all over him, right? Connie Seawater wanted to challenge that. She's like, no, he didn't have blood all over him, just on his hands and forearms. Just on his hands and forearms. So what? Oh, you mean it wasn't on his shirt? So what? Did these events actually happen? Was he actually the killer? How about those questions? No. There wasn't as much blood as you think. So what? Are you telling the truth or not? How about the answers to those types of questions? And Jerome, what are my thoughts on this documentary about the Sea Waters? If it's based just on their stories, how do we know that they're telling the truth? Now, if Arthur Lee Allen turned out to be the Zodiac Killer, maybe more people would believe it, but I would still have lots of doubts. People can get confused. This is true. Collective false memories can exist. And I don't mean anything like the Mandela effect. I have 2 episodes about the Mandela effect here on Black Box Online Radio, by the way. Almost 2,000 episodes on BBOR about all kinds of subjects. Feel free to check some out. But people can have these collective false memories, like when you're sitting around with your family members and you're talking about something, and then it turns out that maybe that event didn't actually happen. This has just started out as a story that somebody made up, and then it slowly gets morphed into something that's real, or that's real in your mind, but not in the external world. I've experienced this with my family members. I've experienced this when I've, we're just talking about going to the beach in 2008. Oh, no, it turns out it wasn't actually 2008, it was 2007, and we didn't actually go to the beach I thought it was in Delaware, it was the beach in Virginia. You can have, confusion among a group of people. Cat Daddy Steve says, I saw the Seawater video before they took it off YouTube. The only explanation I can understand is that Arthur Lee Allen fell when he was coming up the steep trail and cut himself. It's amazing that he didn't get injured in a fist fight with Robert Domingos. Robert Domingos had bruises on his hands. You'd think that Arthur Lee Allen would have been injured somewhat. I don't know. I mean, I completely see why people would suspect Lee Allen as being the murderer of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. It's quite possible that was the Zodiac. I gave it a 79% chance of being the Zodiac. Not 100, though. Not even 80%, 79%. But who's counting? No matter what, people are trying to find the murderers of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. But at the end of the day, it probably won't be Arthur Lee Allen. And Jerome says, it's strange that Connie told me that she doesn't think Arthur Lee Allen was Zodiac. Oh, Connie Seawater told you that? Well, what's their claim then? I mean, they claim that he committed the Domingos Edwards murders. I thought that one of the other stories from the Seawaters is that they knew Arthur Lee Allen and he would stand up on like a table and sing songs from the Mikado to them. The Mikado that the Zodiac Killer incorporated in his letters to the nth degree. I don't know. That doesn't really quite make a whole lot of sense to me. And I don't think the Seawaters are lying. They might be confused, but I don't think they're lying. And everybody, this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning is winding down. You can put anything else in you want in the chat, and I would love to read your responses. And as I've already said, on the Thursday episode of True Crime Talk Radio, I'm going to be doing one about the Phantom Killer. It's going to be a very large presentation. That one's probably going to run a lot longer because I really thought that if I did a live stream about the Phantom Killer, I'd have to start from the beginning. Like when I did the DB Cooper live stream here on this channel, I just start from the beginning and go up before, you got to provide all the introductions before you can talk about the suspects. And with the Phantom Killer, there are a few more complications than the DB Cooper story because the Phantom Killer has multiple attacks, multiple firearms, and I'm even going to have to refresh myself on some of those details. But as for you guys in the chat, thank you so much for tuning in to True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning. It really means a lot. You can get one more cheers from Snoopy. And if you're listening to this at a future date and you have any observations about the Idaho quadruple homicide, about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, about the Zodiac Killer, the Phantom Killer, and Jerome has a final thing about the Domingos Edwards murders. About the murder of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, she said that she was in the car like you have explained, but she doesn't think ALA was Zodiac. Well, the Domingos Edwards murders is not a confirmed Zodiac crime. Maybe there is something to that. I think that would be a ridiculous coincidence. A ridiculous coincidence. I'm not trying to be harsh on Connie Seawater. I'm just not seeing it. But anyway, that'll be all for me now, guys. And thank you so much once again. And Black Box Online Radio on Facebook, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, BlackBoxNed88 on TikTok. And you can also send me larger things via email at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. That'll be all, guys. And see you on Thursday for the Phantom Killer episode. Until next time.